So you can actually interact with the file system directly, uploading, downloading files. And you can also configure the emulator, for example, by specifying GPS coordinates, right? So if you want to mock them in your emulator and want to test your location-based service on your emulator, you can basically inject something here, or even feed that from GPX files or KML files that you have extracted from elsewhere. So it's quite powerful in that respect. Here's some stats. You know, if you want to check CPU loads or memory usage by different devices, that's actually quite handy. So that's the main thing there. I probably really should shut down the
magnifier.
The magnifier, as beautiful as it is, I can't bear it with it. So, but just to show, let's just create a new tiny app and see if that works well. So let's call it my app number 5. So I'm actually doing exactly what I'm suggesting not to do, just numerically increase it. And I want to run it on Marshmallow 6. Do we see that? Yes. We want to have an empty activity. We call that thing MainActivity because that's set that way. So and in general, did we talk about this? We have an activity, which is basically the code that's, you know, the logic that's executed, and layout, the GUI basically that corresponds to it. It's usually worthwhile having similar names, I guess, to do the mapping quite well. But that's something you can explicitly specify. So let's see, we wait half an hour. Doing that, oh, that's faster than I expected. So we have the main activity here basically, cool, and I'm not sure if it actually will work, because it looks, but I think it's still building anyway, so Gradle is still doing its job. By the way, we talk about that in week X, which is probably 5 right now.
Further along, yeah.
Further along, so, but doesn't matter. So just let it build for now. So what you see here is your main activity on create. You saw that already, especially if you did the lab. And then you have this mysterious R class here, which basically brings together all the identified elements and components of your application, so you can actually reference them. So one example here is that you, as one of the first things in the onCreate method, you're actually calling, or the IDE is calling r.layout, and then refers to activity main. And it happens to be your layout that you actually have specified in the beginning. So we said it should be called activity main. It's an XML file in its beauty here. But obviously, modern IDEs have some sort of editor which helps you to kind of design your app in a WYSIWYG way, you know, like unlike the first versions of Android, which was much more painful and you always needed to refine it manually. Here you can actually do it reasonably easy, you know, just dragging and dropping stuff. So we add a text view. We have the important thing here is on the right side, the identifier. That's the way of referencing it from the application. You probably know that if you have done it already, and you can have some other things. Let's put a button there as well, because we like buttons. And the button will have an identifier. Let's call that one button. Maybe button 01. I don't intend to change it, but it's probably a bit more generic. So if we, for example, want to reference the button, find by view, we would say, and then we use identifier because we have an identifiable element, and it happens to be button 01, and we need to cast that. And where is it? The usual import. So and just to get some output as well, we obviously need to attach some sort of activity listener, on-click listener, new on-click listener. We don't do something when we click on the button, so, and that's where the thing starts. So about debugging, it can be really helpful to use the actual logger. I haven't shown you that thing yet, but let's just do something to it. So you have the lock library that comes along with Android out of the box, and you can actually decide whether then you need to basically just indicate what you want to log. So just you have various methods corresponding to the log levels you're dealing with. So like debug, verbose, error, info.
You use the magnifying glass.
Really? My magnifier again? Okay.
It's easier if you just, like you said, go to display settings and
okay.
set up the 125%. It basically just sets down the resolution.
You mean my display settings? Okay. Yeah. Let's see how my... I'm only mildly worried that my OBS will not take that well.
Try changing the font size in the settings.
That's probably a reasonable option. Appearance.
Yeah, your OBS is not doing too good anyway, by the way.
It's not doing too well?
No.
That's a pity.
You're not pushing video fast enough.
I'm not pushing video fast enough. That's yeah. We'll work on that another time. So, okay, I'm doing my stuff here on the main screen right now. I hope it has some effect. Does it have?
It did.
More effect. So, what setting is desirable?
Bigger.
Someone from the back, please. How many points? 24, really? 34. Okay. Let's try that one. Takes a while. There you go. Oh.
That's bigger.
That's bigger.
That's
same. Not big. The editor is separately managed.
You can just control zoom, like control scroll the code.
That's right. It probably works.
Or control plus.
That's right. Thanks.
I don't know if that's a thing I'm asking.
It is in Visual Studio.
It is. I have no idea here.
But here I don't think so.
It doesn't look like it. In fact, now the whole thing hangs. In fact, so it's. I know it's modal dialog. Hang on.
Your browser is not currently recording any video for
font size, Phonos-based fonts. Okay. So okay, let's try it here. Does it work? Well, I'll make it my life's task to find that out eventually. But for now, let's again fall back to my favorite tool, the beautiful magnifier, which doesn't do any sort of vector operation on it. Doesn't matter really, because I'll spend probably about like 1.5 minutes here and then we're gone forever from there. So that's the application. So we have some sort of activity. And what I wanted to show you is in the ObjectListener, you can basically log, and that can be either verbose, debug, what are the other log levels? Error, info,
yeah.
What else do we have? Anyway, I'll show them to you, because whatever we print here, so the idea is here that you identify the application you're dealing with, which would be, yeah, my app, cool. And then the actual log output you're interested in, so yeah, some log output of low relevance, so, okay. Once that is done, I will try to get rid of. I'm so happy that the streaming doesn't work today. So
yeah,
it doesn't, right?
No.
Good.
Stream status bad.
It's very bad. That's
yeah.
good. So okay, we run this whole thing again.
That's good.
I need to activate the.
Perfect.
Exactly, safe. So I need to activate the integration. That's is deactivated right now. Then deploy it onto my device. That's the device. So it will come up. So stuff is building right now. But I actually want to show you is obviously the this one here. Oops, that wasn't good. I forgot to put my semicolon here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember about your semicolons.
Semicolon. That's right. Never forget your semicolon.
It might be your laptop is too weak.
It is very slow
To deal with the OBS and Android Studio at the same time.
It's too much.
Yeah,
it's only
because it started and then it went.
Yeah, but I only have one. You know, that's what I got. So.
When it started compiling, the stream went from good to bad. Seriously.
Yeah.
Alltså standardbild ska vara 5 och så liksom
all right.
Man ska byta med configure, man ska konfigurera och man ska bilda så att det håller 5.
So what I want to get at, once that thing actually works, is Android Studio actually integrates the logging functionality down here, which is kind of good because you can select the device and obviously the process you're interested in. That said, it's currently still, you know, deploying stuff because my laptop is incredibly fast. I have the impression it's faster in the afternoon, actually. So, eventually. Come on. So now only it's installing the APKs. So at this stage, it's actually deploying the application on the phone, and it's running it and launching the activity. Not convinced that it's actually happening.
Yeah, so a side note, you can debug stuff like in the emulator, or how Chris is doing it now, or you can debug your applications from the phone plugged in by the USB cable, in which case you just pick that you want the LockCut to use the phone instead of the emulator, right?
So once that actually works, there you go, finally it's there. So in fact that is showing me a different one right now, but for the sake of the issues we're facing here, is it actually can't bind? Yeah.
It's not linked yet.
I have another.
Now it is.
No, it's the dead one.
That's the dead one? Oh yeah.
So what you can basically do, if you want to see the output, you just click on LockCut down here, and you can link to your phone and the output. The process you're interested in. Right now, that's the old instance of it. It's dead right now. But basically, would we show you all the output that's produced by your instance, and that's obviously not only the log output, but pretty much any sort of output that you usually see. For example, libraries initiates output of those. Garbage collection of a system, runtime compilation aspects, initialization of OpenGL you see here, even though it's not really used. So anything that's really happening under the hood and relates to your process. So it's incredibly powerful in terms of debugging. And yeah, my phone is up.
Yeah. So the OS is pushing a lot of notifications there as well. So you will always see a noise. You will always see a lot of stuff happening. If you have any running apps on your phone, you will see their output as well. That's so right. Like, you know, from the Facebook app, you can see what they are logging out as well. So often what you have to do, you have to filter it only to the process that you want to debug and with the prefix that you want. Because then you really filter to your own messages, right?
So generally, if you do it in the Android Studio here, it will basically force you to filter it by your own process. Whereas if you go to the Android device monitor, you could do the same basically by clicking onto your process, but you have a bit more flexibility, as Marius said. But what I think the filtering options are much richer in that output as well. So you can actually filter by time, process ID, thread ID, an application and so on. You can also develop your own filters. For example, in this case, I was only filtering for output that has my name to some extent in the application package name. So you can only see output that's related to that one with the corresponding highlighting. You can then also filter by, for example, logging level. So right now, for example, we only wanted to see output that's related to debug, and ideally if we press the button, we probably get some output at the far end. You see down here, here's my log output from my own application. So that's one way of actually dealing with this. So I strongly recommend playing around with the Android device monitor. It's quite handy to have, and LockCut in particular. So having that running in the background is quite useful. So you don't need to really restart it. It will automatically detect if a device is online. You just click on it and it will update the corresponding process. But actually, sometimes it's even more interesting just to see what the device output produces, just to see how much crap is actually running on your device in the background, but also to identify laggy applications or that, you know, produce a lot of output. They are likely to actually, drag down your performance of your phone. So it's worthwhile contemplating whether those apps should actually reside on your phone any further or not. I tend to do it quite a lot sometimes because it's more helpful than believing any of those cleaner tools that you might have for your mobile devices. But that's pretty much it, right? So
yeah, also, even if you're not using lock to log anything from you, you want to use LockCut to see the exceptions that your app is throwing.
Yes.
So every time your activity crashes or your app crashes, you go there and check why it crashed, and then you will see the exception.
That's right. So
you can throw a runtime exception, and then you can see the stack trace of the exception to see the reason why your activity crashed. Yeah, your stream went to OK now.
Ah, my screen went okay. So I added a runtime exception. So every time I press the button, just to give some context, this on-click listener is basically run, and it basically produces output, debug output in the LockCut, and now will also produce an exception. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So some hints, like try never to restart the emulator, like reuse the running emulator, because loading up the emulator takes a long time. But you can remove the APK and reinstall it, or you can dynamically restart the app as well. So that's pretty fast. And now when he...
So now we have the app again. I should be connected and I should be able to find my instance. Which I don't. Why do? Ah, there you go.
The 5th, yeah.
There you go. So let's go to the LockCut output. I want to go to the end.
Have you pressed the button?
I haven't pressed the button yet. So now I press the button and we see some magic here.
We have red. So we have fatal exception.
Fatal exception from here is from the which thread. So if you have multiple threads, quite handy to figure out where it's coming from. Main thread in this case, process obviously, and then the classical stack output. Well, if you have done Java before, that's pretty much the usual stack trace you'll see then. That actually points you out where it happened. Well, it happened in the MainActivity instance, on-click method line 23, and so on, and how was it caused? Apparently by some system event, that means button press.
Can you double click on 23?
Yep.
Will it jump? No.
Probably the internal may.
The internal should.
Let's see. So I also here obviously have the feedback. Android will just perceive it as an error and therefore stop the execution. But let's see if we can find my debuggable process. Yeah, not really. Hang on. Nah, yeah, there you go. So there you have.
So now when he clicks on it, he jumps directly to that line which caused the problem, right?
Yeah.
So the exceptions always give you a stack trace from the very detailed one to more and more outside scope of where the exception happened. So sometimes the exception actually happens like inside the library or inside the runtime system, and that's not your code. So you have to check where your code starts and then click on that, right? You don't want to be clicking inside the view in some of the loopers and things like that. You want to kind of see, okay, I'm causing the exception here because then I'm calling this and this and this, and inside somewhere the exception is thrown, right? In his case, he actually calls the exception himself, so it's quite straightforward because it's right at the top. But usually when you have a null pointer or something, the exception is not where you caused it, so you have to check the trace and find where your code starts and then click on that. Yep.
How far back does it preserve the logs in time?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question.
So it starts when you start.
But how long does it keep it? Like, you know, if you keep it continuously running?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
Good question. Don't know.
From the experience, it keeps a lot, but I'm not sure whether it caps it at some point.
That's right.
Yeah,
but
I
it's
think it's a size thing.
Yeah, there is probably like a settings where you say how many lines it buffers. Yeah.
Somewhat, because I think there is a folder somewhere where when it's full, it keeps it and starts a new one.
Yeah.
But it's pretty long between.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
So like from experience, I never felt I need more.
No. You get
I
too
felt
much.
that's enough.
You get way too much.
Exactly. So the thing from experience though is that sometimes it starts too late, right? So sometimes you want to debug something and you like plug in the because you can attach yourself to debug once your app is already running. Like what Chris is doing, he is already attached when he runs, right? But you can like run it, then something happened, and then you want to see what happened. So when you reattach yourself, you still has a little bit of a buffer, and that's a little bit short. So sometimes once the exception happened and you plug yourself in, you will miss it, right? Then you have to rerun it. So I've experienced that, but once you keep things going, the history is long enough
Definitely.
for you to work with it. Yeah.
It's another good reason, by the way, the whole thing is another good reason to give your application a reasonably meaningful name as well, so you can clearly identify what's yours and what's not your stuff.
Exactly.
Is it possible to extend the buffer on the phone for the error logging?
Probably check the debug
I mean,
settings.
it's probably easy to Google if you don't know off the top of your heads.
You probably you need to go into activate the developer mode on your phone anyway. And
Yes.
that's the
Yeah.
closest to what you probably get in terms of configuring that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I suspect it might be the OS specific setting. So you might be able to control it, but it probably is like quite a core feature of the OS of how much log is being buffered on the phone. So as I'm saying, sometimes I plug my phone after and I get it.
Buffer size for logging 256 kilobyte on the machine. So
yeah, exactly.
you can change
So
it.
you can change that.
You can change up to, in this case, up to 16 megabyte. So yeah, so you need to activate the dev options. You generally do that by pressing 500,000 times on the build. How many times? 6, right?
7 times.
7 times on the build number, and then it will provide you the developer options in your settings, and then you can navigate from there. So, but that's very device specific how much options you actually get. So you need to explore that a bit.
And when you're debugging your own app, it's very useful to kill everything else, because everything else will spam the buffer as well.
Can you just kill it by opening the app switcher and just say clear all, or do you have to do something more specific?
So that works for most things. Sometimes it doesn't work for something specific, and then you have to go to program manager, app manager, and like force quit it.
Services.
Yeah. So because sometimes they have like services running in the background, so killing the front-end apps doesn't kill the services, and they keep spamming your buffer, right?
Okay.
So if you've noticed, oh yeah, I've killed it, but it still gets some network things and so on, then you will, usually it's easy to work out which app is it, and then you have to go and like manually force quit it.
So the so killing them in the app switcher calls the destroy on the activity running.
That's correct. Exactly. On the one which shows up, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So even if you don't do filtering, it's like Mike said, it's generally super easy to identify where it's coming from using the app. And in some cases you can't control it if it's like system related, but here you quickly figure out what kind of application you're dealing with. So, and the application tag. So. But obviously there are limitations. I mean, I wouldn't just shut down the GUI. So, but I don't know. Cool. Any other thoughts? No, right? That's it.
So yeah, so when you experience, my app is crashing, then you have ways of debugging, like, okay, why it's crashing. You can put some printouts in, you can check the exceptions.
That's all, yeah.
That's pretty much, and you will be working with it on a regular basis because your app will be crashing.
But do it early so you get comfortable with the tool.
Yeah.
So even for very primitive apps, just run it in background, because sometimes it's so much easier to spot it there than to figure out why or why not your app actually didn't do what it's supposed to do. So because particular also good point is when you move from the emulator to a real device, that's where in my experience you have the most issues, because suddenly an application that seemingly worked very nice and smooth on your emulator doesn't work at all on your device. And usually boils down to very the specifics of your device. It can be as simple as an Android version, but also an additional dependency that's not available or whatever else. So just check that carefully. Sometimes you need to have the support packet library for older versions of Android and they're not installed properly or something like that. So using that output is actually always in your favor.
And vice versa. Sometimes the app will work on your phone but not on the emulator, especially if you have Google Play services dependencies or Google Maps.
That's right.
So you have to really configure your emulator to have things that you need. So it depends, whether to use emulator or phone. It depends. Like on his laptop, I would probably use the phone because his laptop goes to a crawl if he's using the emulator.
Well, there's only one button, that's still okay. But if you have more than one, then it becomes scary.
Exactly. So you just play with it. Sometimes it's super easy to use the emulator and it's much more convenient to automate tests. Sometimes it's just easier to do development cycles with your phone plugged in.
By the way, there's the buffer in case you're interested.
Yeah.
It's on a developer options, even the emulator, so you can play with that.
There is there is a way to use that feature over Wi-Fi without the cable, which I did use. Right, there is an app which allows you to connect through ADB between your phone and the laptop using Wi-Fi instead of the cable, and that's kind of convenient, especially if you want to test, you know, something with the phone. So you can look it up. I can put the link on the wiki as well. I did use it and I liked it.
Cool. Yeah, that's it.
That's pretty much it.
No magic.
Any questions about the UI? Yeah.
Is there a way to make it auto-compile when you make changes? Just quickly do the changes you did without building the whole thing.
Yeah, press on the yellow flash arrow instead of the green play button. On top right, yeah, the one that's grayed out on his screen.
Yeah, I'll change something. Let's see.
Changes.
It will try to just apply the latest changes without building the whole thing. And
This one here.
Control and thumb.
That one that
Doesn't always.
I think
allow
you,
you
to
to do that.
you probably
Yes.
need to configure that. Hang on.
You have to run the app first
Yeah,
to click it.
yeah, you have to be in.
Yeah, so you have a mode, like with the recent SDKs and Android Studio, you have a mode where you have a running app and you're doing some modifications here, and the system will automatically try to reflect what you're doing on the app, which is super handy when you're dealing with UI, for example, or something non-destructive. And it works most of the time, but sometimes when the changes you're making are so big that it has to like recompile, like, you know, you change the name of the method, for example, it has to relink things, and then it cannot just do it internally. Then you have a slightly slower bootstrapping. But yeah, it is possible. So it's possible to be changing something, like if you're changing a label name, that's fine. It will reflect automatically in the deployed app without you going through the whole cycle. But some changes are kind of destructive enough that you have to redeploy. But it will tell you, right?
I think there's isn't it called instant?
Yeah, it's called instant run.
Instant run. I'm not sure if it's need to set up doing.
I don't think you need to set it up. I think you just need to run it, and then you can continuously update the binary. So what it means, it will kind of send a patch to the binary without recompiling the whole thing, right? So it will kind of try to take advantage of those dynamic features I was discussing before, and sort of redeploy partially your app, so it kind of shows how the app is working.
There you go. Now I have it here.
Yeah.
So if I change something now. Error with semicolon.
You have to initiate it,
yeah,
and then this channel is kind of open, and then the changes will be reflected. Obviously, that will only work as long as your app doesn't throw an exception or doesn't stop. So when your app stops, that link stops too. So you have to like relaunch it. Yeah.
So I can just do minor change again and then see, and it should automatically redeploy. Ish. Yeah. So yeah,
it's done.
One click though, but it's fast. Yeah, it's fast. So it has restarted the app immediately.
Yeah.
For anyone who didn't see. Cool. Yeah.
And it says the app changed. So you have a little how they call it?
Toast.
Toast, yeah. Not the sandwich. The sandwich is the bottom one, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Oh.
Okay, questions? Yep.
The project on the left, the files, and which part of the project should be in the version control, which can be generated?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Very
so we did put the, like, if you scroll down, you should have a git ignore in your project.
I'm not sure if it writes it in that view. Probably
yeah. So that's the things that you're not supposed to put into version control, right? So the default git ignore is pretty good, and those are the generated files which relate to the project and to the build things, right? So none of that should go into version control. I've posted the slightly richer set of rules on the wiki. You can have a look, and those things not supposed to go into version control. Yeah, this one, because this one is kind of specific for that project. He doesn't use any native libraries. He doesn't use any, like, you know, certain features that you don't have to have in the git ignore.
That's right.
So if you have the default git ignore, it will tell you if you're using command line. He tried to use the source tree, and source tree was ignoring the git ignore. So was suggesting you should put everything into the version control for some strange reason.
But also that it didn't actually work. But then I changed it to the one you had.
Okay.
Wiki,
Yeah.
And then it suddenly understood it.
Okay.
Yeah, so even when I used just the default one,
Yeah.
I tried to put in files that were in the default.
Okay.
Even but
Right.
the new one on the web.
Worked.
Yeah.
Okay.
was working.
Yep.
I just want to let you know that I figured out how you can zoom in on the
Yeah.
if you
How
go
do you
to
do it?
file settings.
Oh yeah, that's. Yep.
And then editor general.
Hang on, it's on my other screen. Just to.
Yeah, and then just tick the change font size with control.
Ah, there you go.
Ah, you have it.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Excellent.
Oh, that scales nicely. Beautiful. Yeah.
And no more pixels.
Yes, I can delete magnifier. That's brilliant. Yes. Cool.
Yeah, so every time you're not compiling, your stream is okay. Every time it has to compile,
Yeah.
your stream is bad.
So no real-time development then. Okay, that's cool. Did we talk about the structure of the project in general?
No, you can mention it. Yeah.
So just to mention to have a somewhat intuitive understanding. So it's three major aspects that
before you do. So he
Spoilers.
mentioned the layout and the XML file. We're gonna discuss a little bit more about it tomorrow. So I will
Okay.
talk a little bit about how you lay out things and how you use the XML
Yeah.
and how you do the what you see is what you get. So that part,
Leave it.
yeah, you
No,
can
I
leave.
just go very briefly over the three main structural elements. So again, we have the activities, which is actually your code, right? So it's the main activity where you need to know Java and write it in Java for now anyway. So that's all under the Java branch here. You find all the applications that I did here. So this the kind of stuff, the kind of code. However, it's obviously linked to some output, and that is generally in the resource subfolder under layout, where you would find all the different layouts that you can probably use, or that you would attach to a potential activity, right? So you could use different ones. In this case, using activity main, this is the XML file. So it's an integral part of your project as well, right? So you need to ensure you keep that, maintain that file as well consistently.
And as Chris said, it's a very good idea to match up your activity names with
Yeah.
the layouts. So then you keep track of what is for what.
Yeah.
Because if you keep naming things at random, you very quickly get,
you lose
crazy. Because you have to keep clicking, okay, which one is which one, which content of the activity goes to a particular activity, right?
Yeah.
So make some naming convention, for example, like naming the layouts with the activity name, right?
So in addition, also in the resources, you have things like constants that you want to use across the entire applications. So in this case, the app name is one of those, for example, that's injected automatically. They're also managed in the resource area. Then for different device layouts and so on, there's aspects. Marsh will talk about this, I believe, more. So it's all under resources. So think GUI and form factors and stuff like that, all under resources. Code, so logic, actually under Java. But the thing that ties up everything fundamentally is the manifest. And this is basically a specification of all activities, services, broadcast receivers, and so on, that are associated with the application. So think about the application as a loose set of different components that are somehow tied up by some sort of, formal contract, if you like, and that's the Android manifest. And it's nothing but an XML file that basically specifies the element. So here's an activity, an application that has certain properties, and it consists, in our case, only one pitiful activity here, but you could have multiple in there. and have further properties and also indicate where they actually sit. For example, here it says that this activity is the main activity. You could have an activity that is not the one that is launched initially, but actually only launched by other activities. But in this case, that's the main activity, and it's supposed to show up in the launcher as well. So you can actually click on it in, in the emulator, for example, right? So it's actually visible. Hang on. So it shows up in this thing here, basically. That's the key idea. But what you will also set up is and you know that intuitively already from your experience with Android, the permissions. So if, for example, your application needs internet access or access to GPS or location services, as they're called in Android lingo, or any other sort of resources like that, it's also done in the manifest. What I want to say is that the manifest, apart from the permissions, is also mostly automatically managed generally, but sometimes you need to add, additional intents, for example, ways of invoking your activity or application, or some additional permissions. Then you need to modify that manually as well. But the point is, that's also an integral part of your application. So manifest, Java code, and the associated resources, including layouts. So those are the three components you need to keep track of. So just don't just concentrate on one of them, but you need to see how they actually fit together. Note that the layouts are, that the link is as follows. So manifest specifies all the business logic. Business logic specifies all the GUI stuff, right? So the layout is referenced from the activity, and the activity is referenced from the manifest in this case. Yeah, but that's just a brief idea. So you see the interlinkage somewhat, right, of how it all ties up. But more on that tomorrow. Marsh will talk about GUI in particular, right? Yep. Probably manifest as well.
A little bit, yeah.
Bit of manifest. Yep, that's the question.
Where can we find the r.java file?
The r.java file, yes. So that's dynamically built.
So r.java is generated.
Yes.
You're not writing it. You're not touching it. It's generated for you.
But we'll find it. So where am I? Builds. Where am I? Generated. Raise RS. That's the one, and we should find it here. Yes. Hang on. RS values. Where is it sitting? We just looked at it before.
I think it was RS. Check the
RS again. No, it's
no.
I'm perhaps looking from the wrong perspective. Is it project files? That's just project files. It doesn't help me either. We'll figure it out. It's basically indexing all the resources that you have, including layout and identifiers such as, for example, buttons or labels and so on, so you can access them from within your code. What he's referring to is this one here. So we can actually, if you see, there's it's not an explicit import here, but it actually resolves to this R file, and that keeps track of most important things for you right now will be identifiers, so all the possible identifiers that are specified in your layout in particular, and the layout itself. So in this case, it will resolve to all layouts that have been are associated with your project here. In our case, it's pretty much the activity main that we created before. And if you want to access, for example, buttons, as we did here, you do the same thing. You say r.id, and it shows you all the identifiable components that you can access as part of that file.
Can you jump to source? So try R, right clicking on R and jump to source.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Go to declaration. Oh, that's the button declaration. There you go. So and where does it sit? Breadcrumb. So example difference. Yeah, it's not explicit. Anyway, that's the application right now. We'll find the folder eventually. But you see already, it's under the build folder generated, should not be edited anyway. But here's everything related to that. So all the constants are basically automatically
So there is a lot of system things that are
Yes.
defined for you, and there is also your things that you've declared, all your buttons and
Yes. But you technically never touch it. If you get the issue, sometimes what you will experience when you compile and R doesn't seem to be available, so you have this curly line above, just rebuild your project or in worst case restart your IDE. It usually means it got either the cache got corrupted or it hasn't been built properly. So
That's correct.
You can't do anything manual with that file, so it needs to be built by your IDE. But it's, you know, it's fairly complex and full of information. Just wondering, how do we figure out where it actually lies? No. Don't know right now.
It's in source R.
Source?
R.
R. It's up there.
Yep.
And debug.
And then
Com.
there you
That
go.
one,
That's
yes,
the one.
that's the
There
one.
we found it. Yes, thank you. So all the way down there. So that's the file basically dealing with. But again, you never need to touch it. You just need to use it from your activities or services or whatever else you're using. Anything that remotely interacts with another element that you specified.
Yep. So if you check it, it is a public final class, right?
Oh yeah.
So they're using a class which nobody can override to define all the constants. And then everything inside is static.
Yeah.
So it's one of the patterns we were discussing before.
Q. Good question though. Yes. Other thoughts? Questions? Worries? Talk about resources more, Android manifest, layouts, logic. Other than that, we're good, right?
Are there any conventions for how to name your elements in so they make sense in the R ID
Ah, okay.
mappings?
Yeah. So that's the good question. From experience, I tend to name things, the views, based on the activities they are in. If it's a partial view, I make a prefix which says it's a partial or fragment. So I use like shortcuts like FRG for fragment, and then I know that those are fragments. I tend to name things based on the type. So I call buttons BTN and labels LB and so on, underscore, and then what it is. So then when I'm looking for it, it's kind of easy to filter things because the smart sense, how you call it?
Context completion.
The
code completion, whatever.
When you start, you say r.id and you start typing btn underscore, you have all the buttons that R knows about, right? So then it's easy to filter the ID you are looking for if you have some sort of a prefix-based filtering, right? So if I were looking for a label, I start with LB and then I have only the labels, right? You can make it based on a type, but I've seen people making it based on the view as well. So you know, okay, that I'm looking for an element in that view.
Exactly.
So then they start with the view and then the name of the element, right? But you need to have some sort of hierarchical groupings of things, so then it's easy to find it when you need it. So come up with some sort of schema that works for you. You can make it based on the views, you can make it based on the type, you can make it based on something that you will always use, and then it's sort of consistent.
I think one of the tricky things is that you have relatively few views and you have a rather large number of elements, right? So buttons and sliders and all that kind of stuff. So the hierarchy is very flat in this R file, which is kind of annoying because then you have heaps of buttons you need to go through and you need that button one. So I think the idea of following is this kind of activity type and then name convention, you know, you make it up. For example, main button and then button one, whatever else, helps you a lot filtering it, narrowing it down. Otherwise, you're constantly accessing buttons from a different activity.
Exactly.
Which is like a different
I mean,
layout.
you don't want to mess up, right? If you have a button OK, you want to make sure it is the OK button that is for that activity, not the for that or that, right? Because you will have cancel and OK buttons all over the place, right? And you have to link to a correct one, right? So you have to have some sort of a naming schema that makes sense. So I do use like what he has. I would say main, but I would say the full activity name. I would say main underscore button btn. For types, I use the shortcuts because I don't need to say button, right? So I use btn for button, lb for labels, and txt for text fields, and so on, right? And then you have some sort of ID, like OK button or whatever that is, semantics at the very end. So that allows you to kind of filter things reasonably well. It gets a little bit complicated with fragments because fragments can be reused in different activities. So that's why I prefix them with fragment that I know, okay, it's a fragment. Or partial views. So you may have kind of a UI composed of multiple layouts, and then the layout itself is not the full layout, it's like a partial layout that you reuse in places. Then I call it part, that I know it's a partial layout reused in places. But yeah, again, it's sort of up to you. The advice is come up with a schema that you're gonna use, right? Don't leave it like when Chris is coding live and he calls things button 0, button 0.1, button 0.2. If you do that, you're gonna really regret it, like, you know, few days later. It's like, what is button 0.1? What was that for?
That's right.
You will have no idea.
And especially
right?
if the ad hoc compilation of the R file becomes laggier and laggier. So in the beginning it's nice, right? You have 2 elements or whatever else you're dealing with, but if you have a sufficient number of them, it actually becomes quite nasty to do the refactoring afterwards. So it's good to think about, okay, how many activities do I have? How do I name it? So plan a bit basically the structure of your program and the elements. And once you get it right, I think you have a specification that you kind of automatically reinforce in the future, even for very simple applications. So yeah, that's right. Good point. Very good point. So, yeah. Cool.
Any other questions?
That's the text view.
In regards to conventions in XML and HTML, I've seen that a lot of people are using like hyphens instead of underscore to separate like attributes from elements.
Right, you can, yeah.
The spacing between.
That's right. So hyphen in some of the XML is allowed, and you can use it. In Java identifiers, you cannot use hyphen. You have to use underscore, right? But for some things, you can, and in which case that's fine. And I've also, like, personally, I haven't used a lot the latest Android Studio, to be honest. I've used the version from last year and 2 years ago. And the graphical editor was good, but it was not good enough. Yeah. And I tended to do my UIs with XML because it let me control more precisely of what is where, right? And XML has the IntelliSense as well, so it will code complete for you. So if you start typing the, you know, the attributes you need, it will kind of code complete and help you to say, if you want the font to be bold, it will kind of help you do that, right? So I tended to do XML myself because then I have it well organized and I know the hierarchy, I know which elements are children of what and so on, and it was giving me more control, right? Every time I went to the UI and drag something on, the XML get messed up, and then I was like, oh my god, I don't know where things are, I don't know who is child of what, and so on, right? So it gets kind of complicated. So I was doing more with XML than with the graphical designs. I think it gets better, and it allows you to keep the hierarchy. Why is the hierarchy important? Well, you know, when you say find by ID, sometimes you want to find by ID a group, and then you want to find a child in the group, so you need to know what the hierarchy looks like. It cannot be sort of flat or ad hoc. So it's up to you. I mean, whatever works for you. As I said, I sort of like to keep my XML tidy, but the last year Android Studio was doing a decent job of keeping the XML relatively tidy as well. So I could mix. I could do a little bit with the UI and then tidy things up a little bit with the just XML view. So it's up to you. But we can discuss it a little bit more tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what's the IDs that are generated by this designer? They have like this at symbol and then ID and then slash.
Yeah, so that's the IDs which we were just discussing. That's the IDs you need some sort of a naming convention for, so you can easily find them.
Yeah, that's one.
Yeah.
So you edit those fields to your naming convention.
So you can, you basically, this is fixed, right? So the identifier element, I'm not sure it's legible, but the part following that when it's user specified, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, so the before the slash is you should leave.
Yes, because that's the that tells the system that's an identifier, basically.
Yeah, that tells the system generate a new identifier with that label.
Yeah.
Because you can have add ID on also, which means refer to an existing ID. So sometimes you want to say, I want this text to be next to something, and you're referring to the ID of the other thing, and then you say add ID slash, and then there is an identifier. The plus means generate a new fresh one, right? So that's like a syntax for generating a new ID.
Yeah, it's parsed, actually, it has meaning.
It has meaning, yes, correct, yes. The part after the slash is yours. That's where your naming conventions kind of kick in. But the part before, that's part of the syntax, is parsed, and it means generate new ID. Yeah.
So could you use that for to hack in a new ID where it should be an ID in the first place? To make the R class put in another ID?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So what it does, it basically generates a numerical long, which is like the pointer to that ID, right? So the IDs in Android are just long numbers, and then the yeah. Do you have the R open?
Somewhere. Yeah. Hang on.
Yeah. So if you see this code, he refers to the ID based by the name. But then when you go to the R, you will see that all those IDs are basically like long numbers, and you basically index everything by numbers, right? So we just need to know which number it is, and you can hard code it as well. So if you know what long number a particular ID is, you don't need to use the R, you can just call it by the ID itself. Lower one. Yeah. You see those hex numbers? Those are just the actual IDs. So all the actual IDs are those auto-generated longs.
Activity main. There you go.
So it's the same. It's the same as in C++. If you say 0x, it's a hex number, right? They tend to have some pattern, but you can't really rely on it. And also every time you rebuild, you may not get the same IDs. So
yeah, it's not something you should
rely on. Yeah.
work with directly. That's right.
Any other questions?
Add something I Google.
That's right.
The coding convention PDF that you were going through earlier.
Yeah.
Is that uploaded on the
Yeah, it's part of the lecture slides. So you can have you can jump to it from the lecture slides for the lecture. If I did put the lecture in.
I can't see it on the, I only see lecture 2.
Yeah, let me check. Yeah, it's sort of in the middle, like it's the link in the middle between the two tutorials for the C++. I will extract it out because it's not obvious where it is. Yeah, so I've extracted it out. Did you guys try to change the wiki? Can someone try to modify the homepage to see if it works? If you can change the homepage? You should be able to, but
Shouldn't we get like an edit button somewhere?
yeah, exactly. You should get a edit button on the top on the right hand side.
On my page history. Edit button page. Should be around.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't. So I will fix it because we want everybody to be able to put the marking for the labs through the wiki. The wiki is version controlled, so we will have sort of a snapshotting.
Yeah.
Okay. So the streams didn't work today. Mine didn't work because there is a start button which I didn't press. But I recorded the stream, so I'm uploading it now. His one didn't work because the laptop is too slow. So
That's not a legal one.
we will upload that one as well because he's recording too.
Right.
So we will fix it for. I will do a better job tomorrow, hopefully. But there is a start and stop button which I didn't know
Right.
about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh well. Yeah. Can you organize me a new laptop until tomorrow? Cool.
Yep.
Sweet. All right. See you tomorrow then.
Yep. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.